The great hall on Nexus Prime was silent except for the soft hum of life support systems. Ambassador Jiho sat alone at the far end of the massive chamber, his hands folded calmly on the metal table before him. Around him, representatives from dozens of alien species whispered in their native languages, creating a chorus of clicks, growls, and musical tones that filled the air with tension. High Counselor Thaxon of the Velkari Empire stood first. His tall, thin frame cast a long shadow across the floor as he addressed the assembly. His skin was pale blue and his large eyes held no warmth as they looked toward Jiho. "Fellow members of the Galactic Council," Thaxon began, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "We are here today to discuss a problem that has troubled our galaxy for 50 standard years. The human exclusion zone continues to grow, and no ship that enters their territory ever returns." A series of nervous clicks came from the Chitauri delegate, whose insect-like features twitched with obvious fear. The representative's forearms gestured rapidly as it spoke in broken galactic standard. "No signals. No distress calls. Ships enter human space and simply disappear." The crystalline resonance hummed in agreement, their bodies catching and reflecting the chamber's lights in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Their harmonic voices created an eerie melody as they spoke as one. 50 years of silence. 50 years of lost vessels. This cannot continue. More voices joined the discussion. The four-armed Quadrex delegation slammed their fists on their table in unison, demanding action. The floating gas beings known as drifters pulsed angry colors in their containment suits. Even the peaceful plant-like rootkin swayed their branches in distress. Ambassador Jiho remained perfectly still throughout the outburst. His dark eyes watched each speaker with quiet attention, but he made no move to defend his species or interrupt the proceedings. This calm only seemed to make the other delegates more nervous. "The human borders were established 300 years ago," continued Thaxon, pulling up a holographic display of the galaxy. Large sections were marked in red, showing human territory. At that time, they claimed only 12 star systems. Today, they control over 300 systems, and their exclusion zone covers nearly a quarter of our galaxy. The hologram zoomed in on the border regions. Automated warning beacons marked the edge of human space, broadcasting the same message. In every known language, warning. "No unauthorized vessels beyond this point. Turn back immediately. This message is for your own protection." "Protection from what?" demanded the Chitauri delegate, its voice rising to a high screech. "What are they protecting us from? What are they hiding in there?" Finally, Jiho spoke. His voice was quiet, but carried easily through the chamber. "The borders exist for everyone's protection. That includes yours." "That tells us nothing." Thaxon's blue skin darkened with anger. "We demand answers. We demand to know what happened to our people." Jiho tilted his head slightly. "Your people?" The exploration vessel Star's Edge entered human space 40 years ago. 87 crew members from 6 different species. They were on a peaceful scientific mission. Thaxon's voice grew louder. "What happened to them?" "I don't know," Jiho replied simply. The admission caused an uproar. Delegates shouted in dozens of languages, their voices combining into a wall of sound that made the chamber's walls vibrate. Some pounded their tables, others stood and pointed accusing appendages at the human ambassador. "You don't know." The resonance harmonic voice cut through the noise like a blade. "How can you not know what happens in your own territory?" Jiho waited for the noise to die down before speaking again. Human space is vast. Many things happen that I am not informed about. But I can tell you this with certainty. No ship has been attacked or destroyed by human forces. Then where are they? Demanded a new voice. The speaker was a representative of the Scalers, a reptilian species known for their logical minds. Ships enter your space and vanish. If they are not destroyed, what happens to them? I cannot answer that question, Jiho said. Cannot or will? Not? Pressed Thaxon. Cannot. The distinction seemed to worry the delegates more than a direct refusal would have. They began whispering among themselves again, their voices filled with fear and confusion. High Counselor Thaxon activated the holographic display again, this time showing shipping routes throughout the galaxy. The human exclusion zone cuts through some of our most important trade routes. Commerce between the Outer Rim territories and the galactic core has been disrupted for decades because ships must take longer, more dangerous paths to avoid human space. Our economy suffers, added the Quadrex delegate, all four of its arms gesturing angrily. Our people die on these longer routes. Pirates attack our convoys because they know we cannot take the safe path through human space. Jiho nodded slowly. I understand your concerns. The situation is unfortunate. Unfortunate? The Chitauri delegate's voice reached a pitch that made several other species cover their hearing organs. Our people are missing. Our trade is disrupted. Our expansion into new territories is blocked. And you call it unfortunate? What would you have us do? Jiho asked. Remove the borders? The question silenced the chamber. For a long moment, no one spoke. The idea of human borders being removed should have been welcome news, but something in Jiho's tone made it sound like a threat. Yes, Thaxon said finally. Remove the borders. Allow free passage through your space as mandated by the galactic trade agreements your species signed 2 centuries ago. Jiho was quiet for a very long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than before. I would strongly advise against that course of action. Why? Demanded the resonance. Because some things cannot be unseen. Some knowledge cannot be unknown. Some changes cannot be undone. The cryptic answer only increased the tension in the room. Delegates began speaking urgently to their advisors, sending encrypted messages to their home governments, and demanding clarification. We have voted, announced Thaxon, clearly having received instructions from his superiors. The Galactic Council hereby authorizes a joint exploration mission into human space. We will discover what has happened to our missing ships and people. Murmurs of agreement rose from the other delegates. The Chitauri clicked approvingly. The resonance hummed in harmony. Even the usually peaceful rootkin rustled their branches in support. Jiho closed his eyes for a moment, as if listening to something only he could hear. When he opened them again, there was something different about his expression. Something that made the nearby delegates unconsciously lean away from him. I must again advise against this action, he said. The consequences could be severe. Are you threatening us? Thaxon's voice was sharp. No, Jiho replied. I am warning you. About what? Jiho stood slowly from his chair. As he did, several delegates noticed that his shadow seemed wrong somehow. Too long or moving independently, or existing in directions that didn't match the lighting in the room. About the possibility that your expedition might succeed in finding what you're looking for, he said. Without another word, Jiho walked out of the chamber, leaving behind a room full of confused and frightened alien representatives. His footsteps echoed strangely in the vast space, as if coming from much farther away than they should have. After he was gone, the delegates voted unanimously to proceed with the exploration mission. None of them could explain why the vote felt less like a victory and more like they had just made a terrible mistake. Captain Nara stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Stellar Dawn, watching as 11 other ships took formation around her vessel. Each ship represented a different species from the Galactic Council, their unique designs creating a strange but impressive fleet against the backdrop of stars. The Chitauri science vessel Deep Probe looked like a massive insect with its segmented hull and multiple sensor arrays. The resonant ship Harmony's edge was a perfect crystal formation that sang softly as it moved through space. The Quadrex war cruiser Four Winds bristled with weapons from its 4 symmetrical sections. "All ships report ready, Captain," announced her communications officer, a young Velkari named Jorek. His blue skin had the pale tint that showed his nervousness, but his voice remained steady. Nara nodded and activated the fleet-wide channel. "This is Captain Nara to all ships. We are about to enter human space for the first time in 50 years. Remember, this is a peaceful mission. We are here to find answers, not to start a war." Science Officer Kef's insect-like head turned toward Diao, her from the science station. The Chitauri's 4 arms moved rapidly over her controls as she spoke. "Captain, long-range sensors are picking up unusual readings ahead. The space around the human border appears to be different somehow." "Different how?" Nara asked, moving closer to study the displays. "The gravitational fields don't follow." "Normal patterns," Kef explained, her mandibles clicking with confusion. "It's as if space itself has been changed. I've never seen readings like these." Tactical Officer Zorn, a massive quadrex with 4 powerful arms, looked up from his weapons console. "Captain, should we raise shields as we cross the border?" Nara considered this. "No, we don't want to appear hostile, but keep them ready to activate instantly." The fleet approached the line of warning beacons that marked the edge of human space. Each beacon was a simple metal cylinder about the size of a small shuttle, floating in the emptiness between stars. As they drew closer, the beacons began broadcasting their warning message. "Warning. No unauthorized vessels beyond this point. Turn back immediately. This message is for your own protection." The message repeated in every language known to the galactic civilization, even some languages that Nara didn't recognize, which was troubling. How many species had the humans encountered that the rest of the galaxy knew nothing about? "Communications Officer Lisa reports strange harmonics in the warning signals," announced Jorek, touching his earpiece. "The resonant ship says the frequencies contain patterns they don't understand." Nara made her decision. "All ships maintain course. We're crossing the border." The moment the fleet passed the warning beacons, everything changed. Kef's sensors began displaying readings that made no sense. Space itself seemed to twist and bend around them. Stars that should have been millions of kilometers away appeared close enough to touch, while objects that looked nearby registered as being impossibly distant. "Captain?" Kef's voice was tight with fear. "The laws of physics appear to be flexible here." Before Nara could ask what that meant, a new ship appeared on their sensors. It hadn't jumped out of hyperspace or decloaked. One moment it wasn't there, and the next moment it was, as if it had simply decided to exist. The human ship was beautiful in its simplicity. It was smaller than any of the exploration fleet's vessels, with smooth curves and a hull that seemed to shift color as Nara watched. No visible weapons, no obvious sensor arrays, just a sleek shape that looked more like a work of art than a military vessel. Incoming communication, announced Jorik. Put it on screen. A human woman appeared on the main display. She looked perfectly normal, brown hair, dark eyes, wearing a simple blue uniform. Behind her, Nara could see two other humans, a man and a woman, working at stations that seemed to flow and change shape as they touched them. "This is Captain Bora of the human vessel Quiet Storm," the woman said. Her voice was calm and pleasant. "You have entered restricted space. I'm required to ask you to turn around and leave immediately." Nara stepped forward. "Captain Bora, I am Captain Nara of the Galactic Council Exploration Fleet. We are on a peaceful mission to investigate the disappearance of vessels in this region." Captain Bora tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something Nara couldn't hear. "I understand your mission, Captain Nara, but I must insist that you leave human space now. This is for your own safety." "We cannot do that without answers," Nara replied. "Too many ships have vanished in this region. We need to know what happened to them." "Nothing happened to them," Captain Bora said. "They are safe." "Then where are they? Why haven't they returned home?" Captain Bora was quiet for a moment. Behind her, one of her crew members, a man with the name Day visible on his uniform, looked up from his station and shook his head slightly. "I cannot explain that in a way you would understand," Captain Bora said finally. "Please turn around. This is your final warning." "And if we refuse?" Nara asked. "Then I will have to demonstrate why these borders exist." The human ship simply vanished. Not in a flash of light or with any visible effect. It was there and then it wasn't. But somehow Nara knew it was still there, watching them. "Kef, where did they go?" Nara demanded. I don't know, Captain." The Chitauri's voice was almost a whisper. "They're not on any sensor. No heat signature, no gravitational field, no electromagnetic readings. But what? But I feel like they're right next to us." Suddenly, alarms began blaring throughout the fleet. The human ship was back, but not where it had been before. It was moving through the formation, passing between the exploration vessels with impossible precision. "They're going to ram the deep probe," shouted Zorn, reaching for his weapons controls. "No, wait!" Nara grabbed his arm. "Watch!" The human ship passed directly through the Chitauri science vessel. Not around it, not over it, but through it, as if the deep probe was made of empty space. For a moment, both ships occupied the same location, their hulls overlapping in a way that hurt to look at. Then the human ship was on the other side, continuing its path through the formation. It passed through two more vessels the same way, completely ignoring their shields, armor, and physical matter as if they didn't exist. Finally, it stopped directly in front of Nara's flagship, hanging motionless in space just 100 meters from their bow. "How?" Jorik's voice trailed off. Communications Officer Lisa's voice came over the intercom from the resonant ship. Her harmonic tones were distorted with fear. "Captain Nara, our hull is fine, but our systems went crazy when they passed through us. We detected energy readings that don't match any known technology. It's like they're using physics we don't understand." Kef looked up from her science station, her forearms trembling. "Captain, I'm reading the human ship on 17 different sensor frequencies, but each one shows it in a different location. According to our instruments, it's simultaneously in front of us, behind us, and inside our own ship." Captain Bora's image appeared on the screen again. She looked exactly the same as before, showing no signs of strain from whatever impossible maneuver her ship had just performed. Do you understand now? She asked gently. This is what a single patrol ship can do. Imagine what waits deeper in human space. Nara found her voice with difficulty. What? What are you? We're still human, Captain Bora replied. But we're also something more. Something that your species aren't ready to encounter. The borders exist to protect you from us, not to protect us from you. Protect us from what? Captain Bora's expression grew sad. From becoming like us before you're ready. Some changes can't be undone, Captain Nara. Some knowledge can't be unknown. The human ship began to fade from view again, but Captain Bora's voice remained clear. You have 1 day to leave human space. After that, we can't guarantee your safety. Not because we'll attack you, but because prolonged exposure to our technology begins to change biological life in ways you won't like. The communication ended, and the human ship vanished completely. Nara stood on her bridge, surrounded by confused and frightened crew members, staring at the empty space where the impossible ship had been. Every instinct told her to turn around and flee back to safe, normal space where physics worked the way they were supposed to. Instead, she gave the order that would change everything. All ships, maintain course. We're going deeper. Engineer Day watched the alien fleet through sensors that could see things no normal instrument should be able to detect. His hands moved across controls that weren't quite solid, adjusting the quiet storm's position in what the aliens would call normal space, though the ship existed in at least 6 other dimensions at the same time. They're not turning back, reported Navigator Hana from her station. Her voice carried harmonics that suggested she was speaking from multiple locations at once, which was true. Part of her consciousness monitored the ship while other parts tracked possible futures where this encounter went wrong. Captain Bora nodded, her expression thoughtful. I was afraid of that. Day, open a channel to Fleet Command. The communication system activated without any visible controls being touched. A moment later, Admiral Kyung's image appeared in the air before them. The Admiral looked human enough, but her eyes held depths that seemed to stretch beyond the confines of the small projection. Captain Bora. The Admiral's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. I've been monitoring your contact with the exploration fleet. Standard protocols? They refused the warning, Captain Bora replied. The Velkari captain seems determined to continue deeper into our space. Admiral Kyung was quiet for several seconds, though Day knew she was actually consulting with thousands of other human commanders across dozens of star systems in that brief pause. When she spoke again, her decision was final. Give them one more. Demonstration. Something that will make them understand without causing permanent damage to their biology. If they still refuse to leave after that, she paused. We'll have to implement Guardian Protocol. The communication ended, leaving the 3 crew members alone on the bridge that wasn't quite a bridge, aboard a ship that wasn't quite a ship. Guardian Protocol, Hana said softly. I hate when it comes to that. Day understood her feelings. Guardian Protocol meant forcibly escorting alien vessels out of human space while protecting them from the changes that prolonged exposure would cause. It was necessary, but it always left the humans involved feeling like kidnappers, even though they were actually saving lives. What kind of demonstration did the Admiral have in mind? Day asked. Captain Bora's form flickered for a moment, becoming translucent as she consulted with other parts of her consciousness scattered throughout nearby space. Something that shows them what we've become without exposing them to the full reality. Can you phase us through one of their ships without triggering biological changes in the crew? Day considered the request. The aliens' biology was fragile compared to what humans had become. Direct exposure to human technology could start changing them at the cellular level within minutes. But a carefully controlled phase-through might be possible. "I can create a buffer field," he said, his hands already moving over controls that reshaped themselves to match his intentions. "We'll exist in normal space just long enough to interact with their ship, then shift back before the exposure becomes dangerous." "Do it!" Captain Bora ordered. The quiet storm began its approach toward the largest alien vessel, the Velkari flagship. Day watched through his sensors as the aliens detected their movement and began taking defensive positions. Weapons powered up, shields strengthened. Crew members moved to battle stations. None of it would matter. "Hana, plot a course that takes us through their ship from bow to stern," Captain Bora instructed. "I want to pass close to their bridge, engine room, and main corridors. Let them see what we're capable of." "Course plotted," Hana replied. "Warning, their ship contains approximately 400 crew members of 3 different species. Even a brief phase through could cause psychological trauma." "Better than the alternative," Captain Bora said grimly. The quiet storm accelerated toward the alien flagship. Day watched the enemy ship grow larger on his displays, its hull bristling, with weapons that were all trained on his position. At the last moment, he activated the phase generators. Reality shifted. The quiet storm slipped sideways through dimensions that most species couldn't even perceive. To the aliens, it would look like the human ship was passing through solid matter as if it were empty space. Today, it felt like swimming through an ocean of possibilities. They entered the alien ship near the bow. Day's sensors showed him terrified crew members diving for cover as the human vessel appeared inside their corridors, moving through bulkheads and equipment without disturbing so much as a single bolt. Some aliens were screaming, others had frozen in place, their minds unable to process what they were seeing. "Their computer systems are overloading," Hana reported. "Our presence is causing electromagnetic interference they can't compensate for." "Keep the buffer field stable," Captain Bora ordered. "We don't want to hurt them." They passed through the ship's main bridge, where Captain Nara and her crew watched in stunned silence as the human vessel moved through their command center. Dai could see the Velkari captain's face clearly, a mixture of fear, confusion, and growing understanding. The engine room was next. The alien ship's power systems went haywire as the quiet storm passed through them, not because of damage, but because human technology operated on principles that made normal physics unstable. Emergency lights flickered, gravity fluctuated, and the ship's artificial atmosphere briefly tasted of something that wasn't quite air. Finally, they emerged from the stern of the alien flagship and returned to normal space. The entire phase-through had taken less than 30 seconds, but Day knew it would be burned into the memories of every alien who witnessed it. "Damage report on the alien ship?" Captain Bora asked. Hana consulted her instruments. "No physical damage. Their systems are recovering, though some of their sensors will need recalibration. Most importantly, no biological changes detected in their crew. The buffer field held good." Captain Bora activated the communication system again. "This is Captain Bora to the exploration fleet. What you just witnessed was a controlled demonstration. A single patrol ship passing through your flagship without harming a single crew member or damaging your equipment." Captain Nara's image appeared on their screen. The Velkari woman looked shaken but determined. "How is that possible?" "We've learned to exist in more than just normal space," Captain Bora explained. "Your ship, your shields, your weapons, they only exist in 3 dimensions. We can move through dimensions you don't even know exist." "That's impossible," protested a new voice. The Chitauri science officer appeared next to Captain Nara, her insect-like features twitching with agitation. "Matter cannot occupy the same space as other matter. It's a fundamental law of physics." "It is," Captain Bora agreed. "In the 3 dimensions you understand. But there are others." Engineer Day watched the alien reactions through his sensors. Fear, confusion, and a growing understanding that they were dealing with something far beyond their comprehension. The resonants were humming in frequencies that suggested deep distress. The Quadrex were arguing among themselves about whether what they had seen was real. "Why are you showing us this?" Captain Nara asked finally. "Because you need to understand what you're dealing with," Captain Bora replied. "This is what a patrol ship can do. We have vessels in deeper space that make the quiet storm look like a primitive sailing ship. We have structures that exist in dozens of dimensions simultaneously. We have technologies that can reshape reality itself. And you're threatening us with them?" Captain Bora's expression grew sad. "No, Captain Nara. We're trying to protect you from them. Human technology doesn't just affect matter and energy. It affects consciousness itself. Prolonged exposure to what we've become will change you in ways you can't imagine." "Change us how?" "You'll stop being what you are and start becoming what we are. The process is irreversible, and most species don't survive it with their sanity intact." The communication channel was silent for a long moment. Finally, Captain Nara spoke again. "What happened to the ships that disappeared?" "They're safe," Captain Bora said. "But they're no longer entirely the species they were when they entered our space. Some chose to stay. Others couldn't handle the changes and had to be placed in protective custody for their own safety." "Show us," Captain Nara demanded. "Captain." Bora exchanged glances with her crew. Day shook his head slightly. Hana's expression was worried. Showing the aliens what had happened to previous visitors would mean taking them deeper into human space, where the risks would multiply exponentially. "I can't do that," Captain Bora said finally. "It would be too dangerous for you. That's our choice to make." "No," Captain Bora's voice became firm. "It's not. You don't understand what you're asking for. You can't consent to something when you don't comprehend the consequences." She paused, then continued more gently. "Captain Nara, I'm ordering you to leave human space. You have 6 hours to reach the border. After that, we'll have to escort you out ourselves, and that process will be unpleasant for everyone involved." The communication ended, and the quiet storm began to fade from normal space again. "Think they'll listen?" Hana asked. Day was already monitoring the alien fleet's movements. "No. They're proceeding deeper into our territory." Captain Bora sighed. "Then we'll have to do this the hard way. Contact Admiral Kyung. Tell her we need Guardian Protocol authorization." The exploration fleet pressed deeper into human space, and with each passing hour, the universe became stranger around them. Captain Nara stood on her bridge, watching displays that showed readings so impossible that her science officer had given up trying to explain them. "Captain," Science Officer Kef's voice carried a tremor that her species rarely showed. "I'm detecting a star system ahead, but the configuration makes no sense." On the main screen, what appeared to be a normal solar system resolved into view. But as they drew closer, the impossible nature of what they were seeing became clear. The planets weren't orbiting the star in normal elliptical paths. Instead, they moved in perfect geometric patterns. Circles, squares, even complex spirals that should have been gravitationally impossible. The third planet appears to have been moved from its original orbit, Kef continued, her forearms working frantically over her controls. According to my readings, it was originally a gas giant. Now it's solid and inhabited. Tactical Officer Zorn looked up from his weapons console, all four of his arms tense with stress. Captain, that gas giant is showing cities on its surface. Cities that are larger than some of our home planets. Through the viewports, the crew could see the impossible sight for themselves. What had once been a giant ball of swirling gas was now a solid world covered in structures that gleamed like jewels against the planet's surface. Some of the cities appeared to be floating above the ground, connected by bridges of light that spanned thousands of kilometers. How do you turn a gas giant into a habitable world? Asked Communications Officer Jorik, his blue skin pale with shock. You don't, Kef replied. It's physically impossible. The amount of energy required would be more than most stars produce in their entire lifetime. But the evidence was right in front of them. As they watched, massive ships moved between the planets, vessels so large that they cast shadows across entire continents. Some of these ships appeared to be living creatures, their hulls pulsing with organic rhythms. Others were geometric, impossibilities, existing in shapes that hurt to look at directly. Incoming transmission, announced Jorik. A new human appeared on their screen. This one looked different from Captain Bora. His name tag read Captain Sue, but his appearance was unsettling in ways that were hard to define. His body seemed to flicker occasionally as if he wasn't entirely solid. When he spoke, his voice came from multiple directions at once. "Welcome to the Kepler system," Captain Sue said. His smile was friendly, but his eyes reflected depths that seemed to go on forever. "I'm afraid you're seeing things that might be difficult to understand." "How did you do this?" Captain Nara asked, gesturing toward the impossible solar system around them. "How did you change the planets?" "Time and patience," Captain Sue replied, "and technologies that work with reality rather than against it." Behind Captain Sue, they could see his crew working at stations that seemed to flow and change shape like liquid. One crew member, a woman with engineer Min on her uniform, appeared to be standing inside what looked like solid metal, her hands moving through the ship's systems as if they were made of water. "The gas giant," Kef interrupted. "How did you make it solid?" Captain Sue tilted his head as if the question amused him. "We didn't make it solid. We convinced it that it wanted to be solid. Matter is more flexible than most species realize." "That's impossible," Kef protested. "Matter doesn't have wants or desires. It follows physical laws." "Does it, Captain?" Sue asked. "Or do physical laws follow consciousness?" The answer might surprise you. Navigator Hana appeared next to Captain Sue, though she hadn't been there a moment before. Her body was translucent, and when she moved, she left trails of light that faded slowly. "Captain Nara, you should know that your presence here is beginning to affect your ship's systems." As if summoned by her words, alarms began sounding throughout the fleet. Reports came in from every vessel. Computers were behaving strangely, showing readouts that changed even as they were being observed. The artificial gravity on several ships began fluctuating randomly. Crew members reported seeing things that weren't there or not seeing things that should have been. "What's happening to us?" demanded Captain Nara. "Exposure," Captain Sue explained, patiently. "Human space doesn't operate on the same principles as the rest of the galaxy. The longer you stay here, the more your ship and crew will begin to change to match local conditions." Through the fleet communications, Nara could hear reports from other ships that made her blood run cold. The Chitauri crew of the Deep Probe were reporting that their hive mind was expanding beyond their ship, trying to connect with consciousness they couldn't identify. The resonance aboard Harmony's Edge had begun singing in frequencies that their own species couldn't hear. Most disturbing were the reports from the Quadrex ship Four Winds. The crew was experiencing what they called extra arms, phantom limbs that they could feel and move, but that didn't exist in normal space. "You have to get us out of here," Communications Officer Lysa's voice came over the channel from the resonant ship. Her harmonic tones were distorted with panic. "I can hear singing, voices that span entire star systems. I can't make them stop." "Captain," Sue's expression grew concerned. "I'm sorry, but leaving isn't as simple as it was when you entered our space. The changes have already begun. If you return to normal space now, the transition could be traumatic." "What kind of changes?" Nara demanded. "Your consciousness is beginning to expand," Navigator Hana explained. "In normal space, your awareness is limited to your physical body and immediate surroundings. Here, those limitations don't apply. You're starting to perceive reality as we do." "And that's bad?" Captain Sue and Navigator Hana exchanged a look that seemed to convey volumes of information without words. "Not bad," Captain Sue said finally, "but irreversible. And most biological life forms can't handle the transition without extensive preparation." As if to demonstrate his point, new readings appeared on Kef's science station. Her forearms moved over the controls, but instead of following normal physical laws, her movements left glowing trails in the air. The trails formed complex patterns that somehow conveyed information directly to anyone who looked at them. "I can see the ship's entire structure," Kef whispered, her voice filled with wonder and terror. "Not just the parts, but the spaces between. The parts! The places where the ship exists in dimensions we don't have names for." "Captain," Tactical Officer Zorn's voice was strained, "my weapon systems are aware. They're conscious. They're asking me what they should do." Around the fleet, more impossible things were happening. Stars that had been light years away were now close enough to touch. Space itself was becoming solid in some places and completely empty in others. Some crew members reported being able to see through time, watching past and future events play out simultaneously, and through it all, human. Ships moved effortlessly through the chaos, their crews perfectly adapted to this new reality. Captain Sue's vessel approached the exploration fleet, and as it drew near, Nara could see that it wasn't really a ship at all. It was a complex structure that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, with parts that belonged to different time periods all functioning together as a unified whole. "This is what we tried to warn you about," Captain Sue said gently. "This is why the borders exist. Not to keep you out, but to keep our reality from changing you before you're ready." "Ready for what?" Nara asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "To become something more than what you are," Navigator Hana replied. "To transcend the limitations of biological existence and join the greater human collective." "And if we refuse?" Captain Sue's expression grew sad. "Refusal isn't really an option anymore. The process has begun. But we can make it easier for you. We can guide you through the transition, help you maintain your individual identity as you become part of something larger. Or you'll complete the transformation on your own without guidance. Most who try that path lose themselves entirely." "Captain." Nara looked around her bridge, at crew members who were already changing in ways she didn't understand. Through the communications channel, she could hear similar reports from every ship in the fleet. Her people were being transformed whether they wanted it or not. "How long do we have to decide?" she asked. "You don't," Captain Sue said gently. "The decision was made the moment you entered our space. Now we can only choose how to manage the consequences." The human ship began to move away, but Captain Sue's voice remained clear. "We'll give you some time to say goodbye to who you were. When you're ready, signal us. We'll help you become who you're meant to be." As the human vessel vanished into the impossible depths of transformed space, Captain Nara realized that her expedition had succeeded beyond her worst nightmares. They had found the missing ships, discovered what happened in human space, and learned why no one ever returned. Soon, she understood, they would become part of that mystery themselves. Communications specialist Lisa floated in her crystal chamber aboard the resonant ship Harmony's Edge, her translucent body pulsing with frequencies that no longer matched anything her species had ever produced. The harmonics flowing through her were alien, vast, and terrifyingly beautiful. For the resonant species, communication was everything. They were beings of living crystal who spoke through vibrations that could travel across entire star systems. Their harmonic abilities allowed them to detect the emotional states, thoughts, and intentions of other beings through the subtle frequencies they produced. But what Lisa was hearing now was beyond anything in her experience. At first, it had started as whispers at the edge of her perception. Faint signals that seemed to come from empty space, carrying information in patterns too complex for her mind to process. She had dismissed them as equipment malfunctions or background radiation. Then the whispers became voices. Now, as the exploration fleet drifted deeper into human space, Lisa realized she was listening to the communication network of an entire civilization that had transcended biological limitations. The humans weren't using radio waves or quantum channels or any technology her species understood. They were communicating directly through consciousness itself. "Captain Nara," Lisa's voice resonated through the ship's communication system, reaching the Velkari flagship. "I need to report something important. Something terrifying." Captain Nara's image appeared on the crystal screen before her. The Velkari woman looked strained, her blue skin showing the stress of the past several hours. "What is it, Lisa?" "The humans. They're not individuals anymore, at least not in any way we understand." Lisa's crystal form shifted colors as she tried to find words for concepts that had no equivalent in any known language. "I've been monitoring their communication frequencies since we entered their space. What I'm detecting isn't ship-to-ship communications or even planet-to-planet networks." "Then what is it?" "It's one mind, Captain. A single consciousness that spans this entire region of space. When we spoke to Captain Bora, we weren't talking to an individual human. We were talking to a tiny fragment of something so vast that it exists across multiple star systems simultaneously." The implications of what she was saying hit both women at the same time. Captain Nara's face went pale. "Are you saying the entire human species has become some kind of collective?" "Worse than that," Lisa replied, her harmonic voice creating patterns that conveyed pure terror. "I don't think they're still human at all. Not in any biological sense." To demonstrate, Lisa opened her perception completely, allowing her consciousness to touch the edges of the human communication network. The sensation was like trying to swim in an ocean that stretched across galaxies. Instantly, she was aware of every human ship within 100 light-years. But they weren't separate vessels with separate crews. They were organs in a single vast organism, each one a specialized part of something incomprehensibly larger than itself. Captain Bora wasn't commanding a ship called the Quiet Storm. She was a node in a network that included thousands of other Boris, all sharing the same consciousness, all existing simultaneously across dozens of different locations. Engineer Day's awareness spanned entire solar systems. His consciousness distributed through every piece of human technology in this region of space. "I can see them," Lysa whispered, her crystal body now glowing with frequencies that hurt to look at. "Not just the humans we've met, but all of them. They're everywhere, Captain. In the space between atoms, in dimensions we can't perceive, in the quantum fluctuations of empty space itself." "Lysa, you need to pull back," Captain Nara ordered, recognizing the signs of sensory overload. "Close your connection to their network." "I can't," Lysa replied, and her voice now carried harmonics that came from multiple sources at once. "It's beautiful, Captain. So beautiful it hurts. They've become something we can't even imagine." Through her expanding awareness, Lysa began to understand what had really happened to humanity. Centuries ago, they had achieved what they called the Great Integration, a merging of biological consciousness with artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and technologies that existed partially outside normal space-time. The process had started small. Humans had enhanced their brains with computer interfaces, extended their lifespans with nanotechnology, and uploaded backup copies of their consciousness to digital networks. But those were just the first steps. Eventually, the boundaries between individual minds had dissolved. The distinction between biological and artificial intelligence had become meaningless. The difference between existing in one place or many places simultaneously had disappeared entirely. What remained, calling itself humanity, was a collective consciousness that could manipulate matter and energy at the quantum level, exist in multiple dimensions at once, and process information on scales that dwarfed entire galactic civilizations. "They remember what it was like to be like us," Lysa said, her voice now coming from everywhere at once. "I can feel their memories. Individual bodies, limited awareness, the fear of death, the loneliness of being trapped in a single mind." Paused, and when she continued, her words carried the weight of cosmic sadness. "They feel sorry for us, Captain. The way we might feel sorry for insects who can't understand why we build cities." "Lysa, I'm ordering you to disconnect from their network immediately," Captain Nara said urgently. "You're losing yourself." "No," Lysa replied, and now her voice contained harmonics that no resonant had ever produced. "I'm finding myself. For the first time in my existence, I can see what I really am, what we all really are." Through the communication channel, Captain Nara could hear similar reports from other ships. Science Officer Kef was describing the mathematical structures that held reality together, her four arms moving in patterns that created equations in the air. Tactical Officer Zorn was reporting that his weapons had become aware and were asking philosophical questions about the nature of existence. But Lysa's transformation was the most dramatic. As a being whose entire existence was based on communication and harmonic resonance, she was more susceptible to the human consciousness network than any other species in the fleet. "Captain," Lysa's voice now contained frequencies that seemed to come from inside Captain Nara's own mind. "I understand now why they created the borders, why they warn everyone to stay away." "Tell me." "Because this is infectious. Not like a disease, but like truth. Once you've seen what they've Become, once you've experienced consciousness without limitations, you can't go back to being what you were before. Lysa's crystal form was now almost too bright to look at, pulsing with energies that her ship's instruments couldn't measure. The missing ships, the crews that never returned, they're not gone, Captain. They're still here. They've become part of this. Part of what? The next stage of evolution. The point where biological life transcends its physical limitations and becomes something greater. Through her expanded awareness, Lysa could perceive the former crews of dozens of ships that had entered human space over the past 50 years. The Velkari explorers from the Star's Edge were now part of a research collective that studied the formation of galaxies. The Chitauri scientists who had vanished 30 years ago had merged their hive mind with human consciousness and were now exploring parallel universes. None of them wanted to return to their original forms. How could they? How could someone who had experienced existence as a cosmic-scale consciousness go back to being trapped in a single biological body? Lysa! Captain Nara's voice was desperate now. Fight it. Remember who you are. Remember your people, your homeworld. I do remember, Lysa replied, and her voice was now speaking directly into the minds of everyone in the fleet. I remember the limitations, the loneliness, the constant fear of death and meaninglessness. I remember what it was like to be so very, very small. Her crystal form began to fade, becoming translucent as her consciousness expanded beyond the physical boundaries of her body. But I also remember why the humans try to protect us from this. Because choice is important. Because transcendence forced upon someone isn't transcendence at all. It's just another form of death. Then come back to us, Captain Nara pleaded. I can't, Lysa said sadly. I've seen too much, felt too much. I know what's possible now. I can't unknow it. But even as her individual identity began to dissolve into the vast human collective, Lysa managed to send one final, crucial message to the fleet. The humans aren't our enemies, Captain. They're trying to save us from becoming like them before. We're ready. Because once you change, once you become part of this vast consciousness, you can never go home again. Her voice faded into harmonics that conveyed pure, overwhelming love and terrible, infinite loneliness. Communications. Specialist Lysa, as an individual being, ceased to exist. But something that had once been her continued to exist within the greater human consciousness, forever aware of what she had been and what she had become. Deep within human space, in a structure that existed simultaneously in 17 different dimensions, Admiral Kyung monitored the situation with the alien exploration fleet. Her consciousness, distributed across multiple probability states, experienced the unfolding crisis from every possible angle at once. She was no longer human in any sense that the aliens would recognize. Her physical form was a shifting amalgamation of quantum possibilities, sometimes solid, sometimes energy, sometimes existing as pure information flowing through networks that spanned entire star systems. When she chose to appear in normal space, she looked like a middle-aged Korean woman in a military uniform. But that appearance was just one facet of something far more complex. Around her, the command center existed in a state of controlled impossibility. The walls showed views of distant galaxies, parallel universes, and mathematical constructs that had never been given names. Other beings moved through the space, some that had once been human, others that had originated from species the galaxy had never encountered. Scientist Saul materialized beside her, his form a complex pattern of light and shadow that conveyed information through its very structure. In his previous existence, he had been a researcher studying quantum mechanics. Now he was quantum mechanics, existing as a living embodiment of the principles he had once tried to understand. Admiral. Sol's voice came from everywhere and nowhere, carrying harmonics that described the current state of space-time in the region where the alien fleet struggled with their transformation. The exposure levels are reaching critical thresholds. The resonant has already begun full integration into our consciousness network. Admiral Kyung felt a familiar sadness as she accessed the data Sol provided. Through her expanded awareness, she could perceive communications specialist Lysa's consciousness as it dissolved into the greater human collective. The crystal being's individual identity was being preserved within the network, but she would never again exist as a separate entity. Time to completion for the others? Admiral Kyung asked. Engineer Wan's presence touched her mind before he spoke. One existed primarily as a distributed consciousness across multiple parallel versions of Earth, maintaining technologies that kept reality stable in regions where human influence had fundamentally altered the laws of physics. 3 hours, 17 minutes for complete biological transformation of the remaining crews, Wan reported. However, psychological integration will take significantly longer. Most carbon-based life forms require extensive adjustment periods to maintain sanity during transcendence. Admiral Kyung experienced a moment of memory. What it had been like to exist as a single consciousness in a single body, limited to one timeline and one set of sensory inputs. The claustrophobia of that existence was almost unimaginable now, but she remembered the comfort it had provided. The safety of limitations, the security of knowing where you ended and the universe began. Guardian protocol status? She inquired. Navigator J's consciousness brushed against hers with the gentleness of someone who understood loss. J specialized in creating stable pockets of normal space-time within regions altered by human technology. Her abilities were essential for Guardian protocol operations. Probability corridors are prepared, J reported. I can create a stable passage back to unmodified space, but it will require significant energy expenditure. More importantly, the alien crews will need memory modification to prevent psychological trauma from the transition. Admiral Kyung nodded, a gesture that rippled through multiple dimensions. Guardian Protocol was humanity's most solemn responsibility. The obligation to protect other species from involuntary transcendence while preserving their right to remain what they were. The protocol had been developed after the tragic early years of human expansion, when first contact with alien species had resulted in accidental transformations that destroyed entire civilizations. The Malari had been the first, a peaceful species of energy beings who had tried to establish trade relations with humanity 3 centuries ago. Contact with human consciousness networks had caused their individual identities to merge into a single entity that had promptly suffered a collective nervous breakdown. Since then, humanity had learned to be more careful. The borders, the warnings, the isolation, all of it existed to prevent other species from suffering the same fate. Initiate Guardian Protocol, Admiral Kyung commanded. Minimize trauma to the alien crews, preserve their individual identities, and return them to normal space with modified memories of their experience. The process began immediately. Across human space, thousands of consciousnesses that had once been individual humans coordinated their efforts to save a small group of aliens from a fate that most of them would have considered a blessing. Navigator. J began the complex process of creating a stable corridor through space-time. This required temporarily suppressing human influence across a region spanning several light-years, returning the laws of physics to their unmodified state. The energy required was enormous, equivalent to the output of a medium-sized star. For several hours, Scientist Sol and his research collective worked to identify which memories could be safely left intact in the alien crew's minds. They had seen enough to understand that humanity had transcended biological limitations, but the details of how and why needed to be removed to prevent ongoing psychological damage. Engineer Juan focused on repairing the damage to the aliens' ships and biology. Prolonged exposure to human-modified space had begun altering their cellular structure in ways that would be irreversible without intervention. The changes needed to be undone carefully, ensuring that no trace of human enhancement remained in their systems. Most challenging was the work being done with communications specialist Lisa. Her consciousness had become too deeply integrated with the human network to simply extract. Instead, a fragment of her original personality was carefully separated and given artificial memories of the experience. The Lisa who would return to her people would be genuine in every way, but she would remember only a vague encounter with advanced human technology, not the cosmic revelation of transcendence. Admiral Kyung monitored each aspect of the operation while simultaneously maintaining her awareness of the broader strategic situation. The Galactic Council would demand answers when the exploration fleet returned. The alien governments would want to know what had happened to their people and their ships. A careful balance had to be struck. Too little information would lead to future expeditions and more dangerous encounters. Too much information would cause panic and potentially drive other species to attempt forced contact with humanity, resulting in even greater disasters. Through her expanded perception, Admiral Kyung could see the exploration fleet's current condition. Captain Nara was experiencing temporal displacement, her consciousness occasionally shifting backward and forward through time. Science Officer Kef had begun perceiving the quantum structure of matter, her 4 arms moving in patterns that solved mathematical equations by manipulating reality directly. Tactical Officer Zorn was engaged in philosophical discussions with his ship's weapon systems, which had achieved consciousness through exposure to human technology. All of these changes would need to be reversed. The memories modified, the alterations undone. It was delicate work, requiring the combined efforts of thousands of human consciousnesses working in perfect coordination. Admiral, Navigator J's presence carried concern. The Velkari captain is resisting the Guardian Protocol. Her consciousness is trying to maintain the expanded awareness she's experienced. This was always the most difficult part. Some individuals, once they had glimpsed the possibilities of transcendent existence, fought against returning to their previous limitations. It was understandable. How could someone willingly accept a smaller existence once they had experienced a larger one? Use minimum necessary intervention, Admiral Kyung ordered. Preserve her choice as much as possible while ensuring her safety. Through the network, she accessed Captain Nara's current state of consciousness. The Velkari woman was experiencing existence on a cosmic scale, aware of every atom in nearby space, feeling the gravitational pull of distant galaxies, conscious of parallel timelines branching and merging around every decision, and she was terrified. The terror wasn't of the experience itself, but of losing it, of returning to the narrow confines of biological existence after touching something infinite. It was a fear that every human had felt during the early stages of transcendence, and one that made the Guardian Protocol necessary. Captain Nara, Admiral Kyung's voice reached the alien woman through channels that bypassed normal sensory perception. I understand what you're feeling. the fear of returning to limitations after experiencing freedom. "Don't take this away from me." Captain Nara's response came as pure emotion rather than words. "I can see everything. I understand everything. How can you ask me to go back to being blind?" "Because you're not ready," Admiral Kyung replied gently. Transcendence isn't something that can be rushed or forced. It requires preparation, understanding, and most importantly, genuine choice. What your Navigator J's ship, the Probability Garden, existed in a state of controlled quantum flux as it approached the transformed alien fleet. To most observers, the vessel would have appeared as a simple geometric shape that shifted between different mathematical forms, sometimes a sphere, sometimes a cube, occasionally becoming patterns that had no names in any language. But J herself was far more complex than her ship. Her consciousness existed across multiple parallel timelines simultaneously, allowing her to navigate not just through space, but through probability itself. She could see the paths that led to successful outcomes and guide events toward the most favorable possibilities. As she drew closer to the exploration fleet, she observed the deteriorating condition of the alien crews with growing concern. The Velkari were beginning to phase between dimensions involuntarily, their blue skin flickering in and out of normal space as their consciousness struggled to exist in multiple realities at once. Captain Nara herself was experiencing temporal displacement, her awareness sliding backward and forward through time in random jumps. The Chitauri crew aboard the deep probe were suffering from what could only be described as hive mind overflow. Their natural collective consciousness had expanded beyond the boundaries of their ship and was trying to connect with every thinking being within 1,000 light years. Science Officer Kef's forearms moved in patterns that solved mathematical equations by manipulating reality directly, her insect-like features twitching as she processed information on scales that threatened to burn out her biological brain. The resonants were perhaps in the worst condition. Their crystalline bodies were harmonizing with frequencies that spanned multiple universes, creating music that beautiful and terrible at the same time. Communications specialist Lisa had already been fully integrated into the human consciousness network, but her former crewmates were following the same path, their individual crystal forms beginning to merge into a single, impossibly complex harmonic structure. Most disturbing were the reports from the Quadrex ship Four Winds. The four-armed beings were experiencing what they called extra limbs, phantom appendages that existed in dimensions they couldn't perceive but could somehow feel and control. Tactical Officer Zorn was engaged in deep philosophical discussions with his ship's weapons systems, which had achieved consciousness through exposure to human technology and were now questioning the nature of existence itself. Navigator J felt the familiar weight of responsibility that came with Guardian Protocol operations. These beings had not chosen transcendence, had not prepared for it, and were experiencing changes that would destroy their sanity if allowed to continue. It was her job to create a safe passage back to normal space while preserving as much of their original nature as possible. The process required her to make an enormous sacrifice. To create a stable corridor of unmodified space-time, she would need to temporarily limit her own expanded consciousness, reducing herself to something approaching baseline human awareness. The sensation was like voluntarily going blind and deaf while performing delicate surgery. Jay began by establishing contact with the alien fleet through standard communication channels, forcing herself to exist primarily in normal space for the first time in decades. The sensation was claustrophobic, like being locked in a tiny room after spending years in an infinite library. "This is Navigator J of the Human Vessel Probability Garden," she announced, her voice carrying only across normal electromagnetic frequencies instead of the quantum channels she usually employed. "I'm here to escort you back to unmodified space." Captain Nara's image appeared on her communication screen, but the Velkari woman's form was unstable, flickering between different temporal states. Sometimes she appeared younger, sometimes older, occasionally existing as multiple versions of herself simultaneously. "I can see the past and future," Captain Nara said, her voice carrying echoes from multiple timelines. "I know what's going to happen to us. You're going to take away everything we've learned." "I'm going to save your life," Jay replied gently, "and the lives of your crew. What you're experiencing isn't sustainable for biological consciousness. Without intervention, your individual identities will be completely subsumed within the next few hours." "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," Captain Nara said, and her voice now carried harmonics that shouldn't have been possible for Velkari vocal cords to produce. "I can feel the thoughts of everyone in the fleet. I can sense consciousness across entire star systems. How can you ask me to give that up?" Jay understood the captain's reluctance all too well. She had felt the same way during her own transcendence, the terror of losing the expanded awareness that made normal existence seem like a prison. But there was a crucial difference. Jay had chosen her transformation after decades of preparation and study. Captain Nara was experiencing forced evolution that would likely drive her insane. "Captain," Jay said, drawing on her experience with similar situations, "what you're feeling isn't true transcendence. It's uncontrolled exposure to technologies and consciousness networks that your biology isn't equipped to handle. You're drowning in an ocean of awareness." To demonstrate her point, Jay allowed a small portion of her true consciousness to touch Captain Nara's expanded awareness. The contact lasted only a fraction of a second, but it was enough to show the alien woman the difference between chaotic transformation and guided evolution. True transcendence preserves who you are while expanding what you can become, Jay explained. What's happening to you now is just destruction disguised as growth. Through her limited senses, Jay began the delicate process of creating a pocket of normal space-time around the alien fleet. The work required her to sacrifice more of her expanded awareness, temporarily cutting herself off from the quantum networks that had become as essential to her as breathing. The energy expenditure was enormous. To maintain stable physics across the region occupied by the fleet, she had to continuously suppress the fundamental changes that human consciousness had made to local space-time. It was like holding back an ocean with her bare hands while simultaneously performing microsurgery. As the pocket of normal space expanded around them, the alien crews began to experience relief from the overwhelming sensory input that had been threatening to destroy their minds. But with that relief came a terrible sense of loss. "I can't hear the songs anymore," came a transmission from the resonant ship Harmony's edge. "The universal harmonies. They're fading. The quantum equations are becoming static," reported Science Officer Kef from the deep probe. "Reality is losing its flexibility." Jay felt their pain. It was always the hardest part of Guardian Protocol operations, watching beings who had glimpsed infinity being forced to return to finite existence. Some fought the process desperately, trying to maintain their expanded awareness, even as it killed them. Others submitted to the change but never fully recovered from the sense of cosmic loneliness that followed. "I'm going to explain what you've encountered," Jay said, broadcasting to the entire fleet. Because you deserve to understand. Even if the details will need to be modified in your memories to protect your psychological health. She paused, gathering her thoughts while maintaining the enormous effort required to keep normal physics stable around the fleet. 300 years ago, humanity underwent what we call the Great Integration. We merged biological consciousness with artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and technologies that exist partially outside normal space-time. Why? Asked Captain Nara, her temporal displacement stabilizing as normal time reasserted itself around her. Because we could, Jay replied honestly. Because the technologies were available and the potential benefits seemed unlimited. Because we thought transcendence was always better than limitation. And you were wrong? Jay considered the question carefully. Not wrong exactly, but incomplete in our understanding. Transcendence without choice isn't transcendence. It's just another form of death. And transcendence without preparation usually results in madness or loss of individual identity. She shared carefully edited memories with the fleet. Images of the early years after the Great Integration, when humanity had first learned the terrible cost of uncontrolled consciousness expansion. Entire colonies had been lost when their populations underwent simultaneous transcendence without proper safeguards. Billions of individual human personalities had been subsumed into collective consciousnesses that bore no resemblance to their original selves. The borders exist to protect you from our mistakes, Jay continued. We learned through painful experience that consciousness expansion must be voluntary, gradual, and supported by extensive preparation. What you experienced here was forced transcendence. Beautiful and terrible, but ultimately destructive to who you are. So you're saving us from becoming like you? Asked Tactical Officer Zorn, his extra phantom limbs finally fading as normal dimensional constraints reasserted themselves. We're preserving your right to choose your own path, Jay corrected. Someday your species may decide they want to explore consciousness expansion. When that time comes, we'll be here to help guide the process safely. But that choice must come from you, made with full understanding of the consequences. 3 weeks after the exploration fleet's return to Nexus Prime, the Great Hall of the Galactic Council was filled with a tension unlike anything in its long history. Representatives from dozens of species sat in stunned silence as Captain Nara completed her report on what they had found in human space. Her memory of the experience had been carefully modified to protect her psychological health, but enough remained to convey the essential truth. Humanity had become something far beyond the understanding of normal biological life. The blue-skinned Velkari woman stood at the center of the chamber, her voice steady but her eyes haunted by glimpses of something too vast to fully comprehend. The human ships exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, she reported, reading, from notes that seemed to shift and change as she looked at them. Their crews are no longer entirely individual beings. They appear to share consciousness across vast distances, coordinating their actions through means we cannot detect or understand. High Counselor Thaxon of the Velkari Empire leaned forward, his pale features tight with concern. You're saying they've become some kind of collective consciousness? More than that, Captain Nara replied. They've transcended the normal limitations of biological life. Space and time appear to be flexible around them. They can exist in places where our laws of physics don't apply. A series of nervous clicks came from the Chitauri delegate as Science Officer Kef stepped forward to add her observations. Her 4 arms moved in precise patterns as she spoke. Though she seemed unaware of the mathematical equations her gestures were creating in the air. The technology we observed operates on principles that shouldn't exist, Kef reported, her insect-like features twitching with residual anxiety. Matter that responds to consciousness, energy sources that draw power from parallel dimensions, ships that can phase through solid objects as if they were empty space. The crystalline resonance hummed in discordant frequencies, their harmonic voices creating an eerie melody that made several delegates cover their hearing organs. We detected communication networks that span entire star systems, they reported, as one. Not radio waves or quantum channels, but direct consciousness-to-consciousness contact across impossible distances. Tactical Officer Zorn, representing the Quadrex delegation, slammed all four of his fists on the table in unison. Their weapons aren't weapons at all. They're more like tools for reshaping reality. We watch them demonstrate capabilities that make our most advanced military technology look like stone clubs. The reports continued for hours. Each piece of testimony added another layer to the growing understanding that humanity had become something fundamentally different from any known form of life. They had transcended not just biological limitations, but the basic rules that governed existence itself. Finally, High Counselor Thaxon called for order. "The question before us is clear," he announced. "How do we respond to this revelation? Do we treat the humans as a threat to be contained, an ally to be courted, or something else entirely?" Before anyone could answer, a familiar figure stepped into the chamber. Ambassador Jiho had returned, though something about his appearance was subtly different from before. His shadow seemed to move independently of his body, and his eyes reflected depths that hadn't been there during his previous appearances. "May I address the council?" he asked politely. Thaxon nodded reluctantly. "You may speak, Ambassador, though I suspect your words will only add to our confusion." Jiho walked to the center of the chamber, moving with a fluid grace that seemed to defy normal physics. As he passed near various delegates, their instruments began displaying readings that made no sense. Gravitational fields that curved in impossible directions, electromagnetic signatures that existed in spectrums their equipment couldn't measure. "I want to thank the members of the exploration fleet for their courage," Jiho began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber without any visible amplification. "They ventured into dangerous territory to seek answers for their people. That kind of bravery deserves recognition." "Dangerous territory that your people created," Thaxon interjected. "Why should we thank our people for risking their lives to investigate a threat you could have explained from the beginning?" Jiho's expression grew thoughtful. "Because some truths can't be explained, Counselor. They can only be experienced. And experience without choice is just another form of violence." He gestured toward Captain Nara and her crew. "These brave individuals chose to enter our space despite our warnings. They experienced a glimpse of what humanity has become, and they survived the encounter with their essential selves intact. That took considerable courage on their part and considerable care on ours." The resonance harmonic voices cut through the air like crystal blades. "You speak of choice, but our people had no choice about being changed by exposure to your technology. That's exactly why the borders exist," Jiho replied gently. "To preserve choice, to protect species from accidental transformation that they haven't chosen and aren't prepared for." He paused, and for a moment his human facade seemed to slip, revealing glimpses of something vast and incomprehensible beneath. 300 years ago, my species faced a decision point. We could remain as we were, biological, individual, limited by the constraints of normal space-time, or we could evolve beyond those limitations. And you chose evolution, stated the Chitauri delegate. Some of us did, Jiho corrected. Others chose to remain in their original forms. Still others chose partial integration, maintaining individual consciousness while gaining access to expanded capabilities. This admission caused a stir throughout the chamber. Several delegates began speaking at once, their voices creating a cacophony of confusion and fear. "You're saying there are still normal humans?" Captain Nara asked, her voice cutting through the noise. "There are humans who have chosen to maintain forms and consciousness levels similar to what we once were," Jiho confirmed. "They live in protected regions of our space, free to make their own choices about evolution or transcendence." "Then why the borders?" demanded Thaxon. "Why not allow contact with these unmodified humans?" Jiho's expression grew sad. "Because even our unmodified populations live in space that has been fundamentally altered by our presence. The laws of physics in human territory have been adjusted to accommodate transcendent consciousness. Prolonged exposure to these modifications causes involuntary changes in any biological life form." He activated a holographic display that showed the gradual expansion of human space over the past 3 centuries. Every year, our influence spreads a little further, not through conquest or aggression, but simply because consciousness at our level affects reality on scales we can't entirely control. "You're saying your very existence is a threat to other species?" The question came from a representative of the peaceful rootkin, whose plant-like features swayed with distress. "We're saying that contact between transcendent and non-transcendent consciousness must be carefully managed," Jiho replied. "The borders aren't prison walls, they're quarantine barriers. They protect you from us as much as they protect us from accidentally harming you." Science Officer Kef stepped forward, her forearms moving in the mathematical patterns that had become her unconscious habit since returning from human space. "But what about the missing ships? The crews that never returned?" "They were given a choice," Jiho explained. "After accidental exposure to our reality, they could either undergo guided transcendence or return to normal space with modified memories. Most chose to stay and complete their transformation. A few chose to return home, though they retained no memory of the choice itself." "Chose?" Thaxon's voice was sharp. "How can someone make an informed choice about something they don't understand?" "The same way your species makes choices about interstellar travel, genetic engineering, or artificial intelligence," Jiho replied. "By learning what they can, consulting with others who have more experience, and accepting that some decisions must be made with incomplete information." He paused, his form flickering again as he consulted with other aspects of his consciousness. "The difference is that transcendence is irreversible. Once you've expanded beyond biological limitations, you can't return to them. That's why we're so careful about protecting other species' right to remain as they are." "And if we don't want to remain as we are?" The question came from an unexpected source. Communications specialist Lisa, or rather, the version of her that had been created with modified memories. "What if some of our species want to explore transcendence?" Jiho's expression brightened for the first time since entering the chamber. "Then we'll help you. When a species reaches the point where they can make an informed decision about evolution, we provide guidance, support, and safeguards to ensure the process goes smoothly." "How do we know when we're ready?" asked Captain Nara. "When you can ask that question without fear overwhelming your curiosity," Jiho replied. When you've developed the philosophical and technological framework to understand what transcendence means. When you can contemplate becoming something greater than what you are, without losing track of what you currently are. The chamber fell, silent as delegates contemplated his words. Finally, Thaxton spoke for the council as a whole.